Part 4, The Preacher. Without a Vivekananda, without an Abhedananda, how far outside India could have traveled the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna? This is a question we cannot answer. Chapter 25, Journey to London. Seldom has an eminent spiritual personality been conscious of his place in history more than was Swami Abhedananda. The year 1896 remains memorable in his life, for it was during the closing months of this year that we find him for the first time in the role of a preacher, following the call from his leader Vivekananda, who was then in London. But let us begin the narration from the beginning. We have stated already previously in the book that after his recovery from the near-fatal illness, which kept him completely bedridden for 4 months, he had devoted himself in organizing the town hall meeting. Then, in the early months of 1895, he left Alabazar Muth for the final phase of his pilgrimage. His stay at Almora could not have been more than a few months, according to his own statement, when he wrote, "I never thought, as I wrote the article in the Brahmavedan, that I would ever have to cross the seas and go to the West for preaching religion at the call of Swamiji, that is, Vivekananda. However, after spending a few months at Almora, I returned to Alabazar Muth, walking all the distance by foot." So he must have returned to the monastery not earlier than January 1896. Now let us follow the itinerary of Swami Vivekananda since he left New York on April the 15th, 1896, for his second visit to London. Before sailing for London, he had written to Swami Sharadananda at Alabazar, requesting him to proceed to London, and accordingly he reached there long before Swami Vivekananda had arrived. For several years he had not seen any of the Gurubhais, so his meeting with Swami Sharadananda was an event of great joy. Swami Sharadananda brought all the news from India. He told his brother monk about the monastery in Alabazar and of every one of the Gurubhais. The Swami was full of plans at the time, which he communicated to his brother monk, who was lost in wonder at his indefatigable energy and his apostolic fervor. We also gather from the reports, as were sent by Sharadananda and published in the Brahmavedan, that Vivekananda had made a good beginning in London. His work here had begun in the beginning of May and continued almost at a stretch for a period of 6 months. Clubs, societies, and drawing rooms opened their doors to him. Students also grouped themselves to hear his lectures. In short, Vivekananda worked indefatigably in those days, even more than he had done during his previous visit. He was in the highest spiritual mood during his stay in London. But according to his principal biographers, the Swami's work in London was more spiritual than organized. It was written, "He conferred the spirit, leaving the form to be organized later." He often said of himself that he was not an organizer but a preacher. The man who was destined to give perfection to Vivekananda's work in England and America was none other than Swami Abhedananda, who alone combined in him the capacity and genius of both a preacher and an organizer. Swami Vivekananda's second visit to England was full of tremendous activities, and exhausted with work, he now needed rest. The same time when he was busy with his work in London, he had to look back across the Atlantic, where the demand for a Swami was persistent. So at the end of June 1896, Swami Sharadananda was sent there along with Mr. J. Godwin, a distinguished European disciple of Vivekananda. Here it should be noted that before he left New York for London, Vivekananda had consolidated his American work by organizing the Vedanta movement into a definite society and by issuing his teachings in a book form. Thus came into existence the Vedanta Society of New York, of which he was the founder. It was a non-sectarian body with the aim of preaching and practicing Vedanta philosophy and applying its principles to all religions. It invited members of all religions, creeds, and institutions to become its members without changing faith. Toleration and acceptance of all religions were its watchwords. Such were its general character. Its members became known as Vedantins and met regularly at appointed times for the purpose of carrying on cooperation in organized work and for the study and propagation of Vedanta literature. The society, which came into being in the beginning of 1896, reflects the genius of Swami Vivekananda as a preacher. And though initially it was humble as could be imagined, yet it destined to form the nucleus of the mighty Ramakrishna Movement that started under the able leadership of Swami Abhedananda, not long after his advent there. But as Swami Vivekananda's mind was wholly preoccupied with his work in America, and as there was none to look after the newly established Vedanta Society, he thought of sending Swami Sharadananda there. When planning to send Sharadananda to America, Vivekananda had foreseen the need of such an lieutenant to assist him in his work in London. Accordingly, he wanted one from Al-Bazar, and his cable from London was categorical in this respect. Exhausted with the strenuous exertion of his London work, the Swami left London in the last days of July for a tour and holidays in the continent. Before starting his continental tour, which lasted for 6 weeks, Vivekananda had sent a cable to Swami Ramakrishna Ananda, that is, Shashi Maharaj, which stated, "Send Kali immediately to London to assist me in my work here. I am arranging his passage." Swami Abhedananda, who had then just returned from Almora, was at once shown the cable, and by common consent he was chosen. At first there was some hesitation in his mind. Then he sat in deep meditation in the shrine room of the Muth, and we can only presume that as he sat there alone before the picture of his master, Sri Ramakrishna, pondering over the call of his leader from the other side of the sea, there must have flashed before his mind that the time had come for him to emerge out of obscurity of the wandering life and take upon himself the sacred task of propagating Hindu philosophy and religion abroad in the lines already laid down by his master as by his leader. Yet he had to stand by his side so that India of the ages could once again assert herself as the spiritual leader of the world. But there were other considerations also that had been weighing on his mind. Would he be able to undertake the task for which the leader had called him? While he was an erudite scholar in Sanskrit, he thought his knowledge in English, as compared to Vivekananda, was certainly not so high as to embolden him to his journey to the West. The brother monks, however, encouraged him, saying, "You need not worry, Kali. The master will guide you as he had done with Naren when he went alone, and almost penniless, to attend the world's Parliament of Religions in Chicago. The master's will must be done." Thus encouraged, Swami Abhedananda resolved to respond to the call of his leader and determined to start for London. The unknown Hindu sannyasin who had been traveling so long across the length and breadth of India barefooted, living a life of severe austerity, in constant meditation and deep study, now prepared himself to make his appearance on the world stage as a preacher and teacher. Thus his life took a new course when the call from his beloved leader to help him in his work in London. He threw away the loincloth of the wandering monk, dressed himself in coat and turban, and sailed for England. It is on record that the whole brotherhood at the Al-Bazar monastery rose to the occasion to make the necessary preparations for the voyage of Swami Abhedananda. It was in the middle of July 1896 that a hackney carriage, which was provided by a householder devotee of Ramakrishna, wheeled out of the premises of the Muth towards the Outram Ghat, carrying within it Swami Abhedananda and the other brother disciples. As he entered into his cabin on board the SS Golconda, The brother monks bade him a hearty goodbye, uttering, Ayam Aramba, Shubhaya Bhavatu, which meant, may this beginning prove propitious. And how it proved propitious will be seen as we come across the subsequent history of his life as a preacher and a teacher, which extended to a period of no less than a quarter of a century. Indeed, it was the glorious period of Swami Abhedananda's eventful life, and it can stand in comparison only to that of his worthy leader. He was nearing 30 when Abhedananda left India for England, while Vivekananda was 32 when he left India for America. He arrived in London in September after Swami Vivekananda had finished his continental tour. The voyage was completed in the course of 5 weeks, and during this time he had to remain bedridden for a few days due to seasickness. When the ship Golconda anchored at the London port, there was none to receive him, and this distressed him to some extent, as the place was utterly unknown to him. Fortunately, he met with a Bengali gentleman at the jetty, and it was from him that Swami Abhedananda gathered the whereabouts of Swami Vivekananda, and he was to be available at the house of Mr. W.C. Banerjee. This name was familiar to him, for he was not only a legal luminary of his time, but was also the first Congress president. When he arrived at his place, Abhedananda introduced himself as a spiritual brother of Swami Vivekananda, and it is needless to mention that the stranger was cordially received by Mr. Banerjee. He had been staying in London since a long time, and he had also occasion to attend some of the public lectures of Swami Vivekananda in London. It seemed to Abhedananda that Banerjee himself was a native Christian and full of praise for the work done by Vivekananda. After staying with him for about half an hour, Abhedananda left the place and went to a flat at Grey Cross Gardens in Westminster, where Swamiji was then staying since his return from the continental tour. He was very cordially received by his leader, Vivekananda. I sent the urgent call to help me in my London work. I am very glad you have come. As he heard those words from Swami Vivekananda, Abhedananda felt very happy. Indeed, as he stood before his leader, there was happiness for both. Where is Sharad? I have sent him to America in the company of Godwin. Has he been properly groomed for the task? Certainly. I have given Sharad all possible instructions into the manner and matter of the preaching that he would be called upon to take up. You see, Kali, there were repeated requests of my American disciples and students of Vedanta in America, so I had to send him to New York. He left London at the end of June. How is he doing there? Fine. The reports I have so far received from America are all in his favor. Then Swami Vivekananda inquired about the situation at the Alabazar booth, and when he was appraised of the details by Abhedananda, he seemed to be very happy. Abhedananda later wrote, I have found Swamiji in the highest spiritual mind during his stay in London. 1 month passed by since his arrival in London, and by this time Vivekananda did all in his power to educate the newcomer in the responsibilities of his new life. Day after day, he trained him so that Abhedananda would be able to carry on the work successfully following upon his own departure for India. For he had already thought of sailing for India at the end of the year and was therefore anxious to leave behind a worker, fitted both spiritually and intellectually for the responsible position of a preacher of Indian culture, religion, and Vedanta in London. Abhedananda was also introduced to Mr. F.F. Sturdy and Mr. and Mrs. Sevier, and also to other distinguished English disciples of Vivekananda. One day he was also taken to 39 Victoria Street, where Mr. Sturdy had engaged a large room for lectures of Swami Vivekananda. As I heard one day Swamiji's lecture, I was struck with wonder at his eloquence and exposition of Hinduism. Thus said Abhedananda many years later when reminiscing about his early days in London. He was equally amazed to see the progress of his leader's work in London, which was growing in a pace, and the classes were becoming bigger as they went on. One day, in the silent evening hours, while discussing his future plan of work with his brother monk, Vivekananda told him, "I am hopeful and enthusiastic that with 20 earnest minded and capable preachers of Vedanta, I can awaken the West in no time." Abhedananda then realized for the first time the vast importance of his leader's work and also of the responsibility that awaited him. Did he at the time also realize the importance of Vivekananda's work in England, so far as its influence on the Indian public was concerned? Perhaps he did, for when he heard from his leader that one blow struck outside of India is equal to 100,000 struck within, we can presume that Abhedananda had become fully conscious of the new task he was called upon to undertake. Thus passed 1 month, and the grooming of the future preacher was complete. Then one day it so happened that Swami Vivekananda, while handing over a printed notice to his brother monk, told him, "Kali, you will have to give a lecture at the Christo-Theosophical Society." "But you were supposed to speak there." "I am feeling tired, so I have designated you to speak in my stead." "Your name has been printed as the main speaker." "But I have never lectured. It is impossible for me." Did I know anything about lecturing when I stood on the platform of the world's parliament of religions? Whatever I have achieved is all by the grace of the Master. Have faith in him, and you will blossom as a fine preacher. So any further argument with him was useless, and the future preacher had to submit to the wish of his leader. Then came the memorable day, 27th October, 1896, in his life as a preacher, when Abhedananda gave an excellent address on philosophy and religion of the Panchadashi, which is a famous work of Vedanta, before a learned audience of the Christo-Theosophical Society at Bloomsbury Square in London. Swami Vivekananda was present on that occasion and was highly pleased at the success of his spiritual brother. "Even if I perish out of this plane, my message will be sounded through these dear lips, and the world will hear it." These were the beatific words from Swami Vivekananda that he expressed in appreciation of the young Abhedananda. The subsequent career of Swami Abhedananda bears ample testimony to show how prophetic was this utterance. The following extract from the earlier edition of Vivekananda's major English biography will be read with interest by the readers of Abhedananda's life, for it brings to our mind a complete picture of his brilliant performance on that memorable day at Bloomsbury Square. In it, the biographer wrote, "One of the events which satisfied the Swami immensely was the success of the maiden speech of Swami Abhedananda, whom he had designated to speak in his stead at the club in Bloomsbury Square on 27th October 1896. The new monk gave an excellent address on the general character of Vedanta teaching. And it was noticed that he possessed spiritual fervor and possibility of making a great speaker. A description of this occasion, which affords a beautiful glimpse of the Swami's personality and character, has been written by Mr. Eric Hammond, and we quote the following from his report as incorporated in the biography of Vivekananda. At the club in Bloomsbury Square, which invites and gives receptions to the preachers of different creeds and hears what they have to say, Swami Abhedananda appeared. His countenance lacked naturally that expression of interrogation which is often inseparable from the faces of the clerics of the West. An embodiment of calm, of sagacity, of assured attainment, and certainly enwrapped with garment wise. One had in his presence a sense that he knew. Of his smile one retains glad remembrance. It had in its kindly radiance a love deep and steadfast, a something so subtly exquisite that no word but ineffable can be found for it. From this description, we can easily infer that Swami Abhedananda gave ample evidence of his genius as a Hindu preacher in the very maiden speech that he had on that occasion to deliver. It was an occasion also for his leader to make a prediction, which speaks in a few words, though we know a lot about the latent power of this preacher. From Mr. Hammond's account, we further learn that an overwhelming joy was noticeable in Swami Vivekananda in the scholarly success of his brother. Joy compelled him to put at least some of itself into words that rang with delight unalloyed. It was the joy of a spiritual father over the achievement of a well-beloved son, a successful and brilliant student. The master, that is Swami Vivekananda, was more than content to have effaced himself in order that his brother's opportunities should be altogether unhindered. The whole impression had in it a glowing beauty that is indescribable. Mr. Hammond also informs us how after the meeting was over and people were passing out the house, Swami Abhedananda with them was besieged by questions and by kindly praise and thanks. It was thus with great confidence that Swami Vivekananda left the entire charge of his London work to Swami Abhedananda before sailing for India in December 1896. Left alone in the field, Abhedananda held regular classes, delivered public lectures, and devoted much time in answering questions and queries arising either from the lecture on the position of Vedanta in general. From the contemporary report, we gather that Abhedananda ably carried out the Vedanta work in London during the absence of Swami Vivekananda. And when he was thus working hard to give a permanent footing to the London Vedanta Society, all of a sudden a call came to him from the other side of the Atlantic. It is recorded in the original edition of Swami Vivekananda's English biography that the Vedanta movement both in England and America was carried on successfully by Swami Abhedananda and Swami Sharadananda respectively. As regards to the former's work in London, it has been stated, Swami Abhedananda, who had taken charge of the classes in London, continued them ably and daily added to his own power as a teacher. He also conducted classes in Wimbledon and other places and began a series of lectures starting January 12th, after the Christmas and New Year's holidays. His exposition of Vedanta was very lucid and instructive. The plan pursued was rather different from that formerly followed. One lecture given early in the week in the morning was repeated to a different audience assembled on another evening. A portion of this evening and the whole of another morning was given to questions and objections. When Swami Sharadananda was called back to Swami Vivekananda to help his work in India, the work in America needed an able preacher, and so went the directive from the leader in Calcutta to his brother monk in London to proceed to New York. There were also urgent and repeated calls from the Vedanta Society of New York for a Swami to take charge of the center. Thus, when he was becoming more and more popular in London, Abhedananda was obliged to leave for America in the latter part of July 1897, after working for some 10 months in London.